Welcome back to the Berg podcast. Thanks for joining us today. With me today is Dan.
Hey, everybody.
And Ford.
Yo, what's going on?
And we're talking today about the not work-life balance, but balancing the fact that we're in an industry where there's hard deadlines and sometimes it takes long hours, with knowing that work isn't the only thing happening in our people's lives, right?
Yeah, it's sort of something I was talking about, and we've talked about it before. But I don't like work-life balance as just a thing. Like, work, it separates work and life. Work is part of your life.
Right, for sure.
But realizing that we want to get it done. Like we're built on a culture that we want people to find solutions. We want people to be engaged and want to see things through. And we want to finish, what we started. Mm-hmm. But we also want people to go home and have time for their family, their spouses, whatever their interests are, whatever they want to do. And sort of when I was thinking it through, sort of like work hard, play hard is where my mind went. That at the same time that when it's time to work, we go out and we work as a company, as individuals, as people, and we get stuff done. But then when it's time to go home, I want to do the same thing. I want people to have the capacity and the bandwidth to go home and enjoy whatever it is that they like to do at home and have the same capacity to do that.
Yeah. We talk a lot about like farmer mentality, yep. Right? And I was thinking about that not long ago. I was talking to somebody and I think it still applies. I think it's still definitely relevant. Farmers, extremely hard workers, and they've got a very specific window of time, right? They've got to get it done. Otherwise, they're going to be in trouble. Whether that's the beginning of the season when they're prepping and planting, or the end of the season when they're harvesting. If they don't hit their windows, they're in trouble, right? And I thought there's a lot of relevance there, but I feel like our industry might be even less seasonal than farming, right? There is an off season for farming. And maybe I just don't get it. I've never been a farmer.
Depends if you're milking cows or if you're just doing cash crops. That's a big difference.
Okay. That's my mind. You're right. My mind immediately goes to crop farming, right? Yeah. Not necessarily livestock. Yeah. That is probably also no break.
There's zero. That's probably
even
makes
less.
It worse.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's important though to keep in mind, right? Like our industry, there used to be the perception that hey, we're going to work really hard for 9 months out of the year, and then 3 months out of the year, it's going to be slow, or you're going to get laid off, or whatever. And at least as an organization, we've never really operated like that. We've kind of are a 12-month a year doing something.
I think that's based on this area in general. You think about if you're somewhere, I don't know.
Arizona.
Well, Arizona, you think of the Carolinas, the place like that, there it is more traditional season. I think it's we're kind of at the cusp. It used to be the 9-monthers, and now that's really gone. You got to be Maine, Vermont, up in the real high areas. You got to be
further away, further north.
Because they're going to still push to get stuff done. Mm-hmm. Another thing is, too, that, intentionality and control of your finances matters, because in the old days, people would be thrilled with that type of scenario. Now, trying to have, we try and keep it 12 months because it's a steady paycheck for everybody, and there's not the downtime. Whereas that before, that kind of was set up that way. And now it's just not really viable to do that in the same format. Yeah,
and it's a really funny thing because as we've had a good I'd say even quarter here with being really successful with onboarding some people, and we've talked through that. Mm-hmm. But in those conversations, it's a really funny conversation to have, because on the one hand, there's people that are saying they're really attracted to the idea that as a company, we say that we want to respect people's time to be with their family or to do the things outside of work they like to do. At the same time, they are really attracted to the idea that we seem to be able to provide consistent work hours over the course of a day, a month, a season, a year, and over the years. So, we have, and it's not different people. So it's the same person saying, I'd like to come here because you can provide me a lot of hours, and I want to work, and I want to, make money. I want to be successful. I want to get things done. And also saying that we really like the work-life balance. And one that comes to mind right now, we discussed it with a couple of different employees who are going to take advantage of it soon, is the parental leave package, right? Yeah. In other words, it's not real common in our industry, I don't believe. It's become more commonplace in the world. It wasn't even commonplace in the world some time ago. I mean, parental leave for fathers is a new thing, and even for mothers to provide some level of parental paid leave is not something that you see overly commonly in construction.
Sure.
And we got a couple guys who were going to take advantage of it. And one in particular was a new hire, and he was coming on, and we're talking through, what do you need in terms of compensation? What are you looking to make? What do you need in terms of vacation? Where you came from, that you were there for a while? How much vacation did you build up? That sort of conversation. And he said, well, this is where I am. And it's important to me this specific year because my wife's going to have a baby. And it's, I want to be able to be there. And I was like, okay, well, we can factor in both what your expectation is based on your work history and your experience and what you built over time. But I let him know about the parental leave policy. And he was like, that's crazy. That's an amazing benefit that I haven't had anywhere I went. So good timing for him. And he didn't come into it knowing that. And even the way we structured it, I think the way we structured it is really another example that shows our intention to both get things done, provide work for our team, but also provide the freedom for them to do it. In that we didn't say you have to, our policy is 80 hours. I think I'm proud to say that. None of us, your kids were already born. Ford and I were here when our kids were born, and we didn't have parental leave then. Right. It wasn't a benefit born out of, hey, this would be good for Ford and Dan. But the other crazy thing about the 80 hours is when we set it up, and I think it was Ford, it was not me, it was either you or Ford who came up with the idea that we didn't force anyone to take it. Like, you didn't have to say, okay, you have the first 80 hours of work time after your child's born to stay home, but rather that you can divide it up as you see fit. So some people use it that they take a little bit of time and then they take more, say, 2 or 3 weeks later, because of the way it works with their spouse. Their spouse needs to go back to work for their job. And then others take it that, they take some time and then they spread it out further where, they can go to doctor's appointments, or they, have off a day every other week or whatever it is. Cause you have, what is it, Bryce? Is it 6 weeks, 6 months? How long do you have to take that? Do you remember?
6 months. Yeah.
6 months. So, I mean, we've seen people use it different ways, but I think it's indicative of what we're trying to talk about, right? Yeah. That we came up with a plan that not only provided you a balance and to have time for your family, but also gave you the freedom to take it in a framework that you could still work the hours you want to work.
A little Garth Brooks, little thunder rolls.
Yeah, a little thunder there.
Well, I think
somebody agrees with me.
We have to talk about is that, the balance thing is people balance it based on hours, right?
Right.
And I think it really boils down to intentionality. Because if you're intentional while you're at work, you're going to be more productive. You're going to get done sooner. You're going to get to go home sooner. If you're at home, you put your phone down and spend time with your people that you care about. Like, I literally have on my iPhone a space or like a group of apps that the title is Time Waster, right? So that's, you're sitting in the airport, you can't do anything else, or, but it's amazing how much the phone has just like, you think about 15 minutes a day or whatever it is, like you're scrolling through something. Now, I'm off all of them at this point because of just personal choices. But, those little things, like that time, like, you look at sometimes on a job site and you see like just like a whole job site, not just our team, but like just the whole job site. And like, okay, if they got done that task 15 minutes sooner because they didn't take that time that they weren't being productive, not break time, but we're talking about just like, just move to get it done, they could go home earlier. And so that's kind of the thing. Cause usually every day we have a certain amount of work that we're trying to target to get done that day. And usually, with proper project management, everything is set up that, okay, it's going to take us this many days. Every day over that you're there is affecting your time to be, if we have to work a Saturday because we couldn't get it done in the Monday through Friday or something like that. So I think that's the part that like the work-life balance, people are like, well, they want to be 40 hours and 40 hours or whatever it is. And I just, there was a thing we had a speaker at something and they're like, talk about the wheel and then someone else said about it's like a seasons of life, like a certain season, it's going to be a little out of bounds, but then it might go bounce the other direction. So it's like it's a total sum. It's not just like in 1 week snapshot. It's not a 1 month snapshot. It's over the longevity of time.
Yeah, we were talking about it actually this weekend in an odd way that a couple of my cousins are, I'm the oldest, and they're the youngest of my cousins are in their mid-20s, came out of college, in the workforce in different ways, and their work and we don't see them, so like my kids and my wife are all saying we don't see Mia, or we don't see this other person. We were talking about Mia specifically, and she's a nurse. And we had that exact discussion, and we said the phrase we used was a season of life. And we were like, the season of her life right now, as she got out of school, she needs to pay off all this debt. She bought a house. She needs to, she's trying to get her life started and to be what she wants it to be. Mm-hmm. She needs to work right now. So any shift anybody offers, Mia's going to take, and so you'd say like, oh, she doesn't have work-life balance, but only if you're looking at it in that tight window. If you back it off, she's trying to build a work-life balance by saying, I'm going to do these things so that I can have a life. I can do these things I want to do. I saw another study for it just recently, and it was interesting. It was somewhere in Europe. I don't remember where, but they compared, it was a controlled study where they reduced screen time, and not school screen time. They were reduced because that's become this whole other thing where kids are on screens a lot at school, but they were talking about just time wasters, exactly what Ford's talking about. And I think that the number was saying that the average like US teenager right now spend 7 or 8 hours a day on one variation of a screen or another. In essence, like, I'm not saying wasting time because that's going to be judgmental, but it was in non-productive uses, like whether it be social media or gaming or watching TV or streaming things or all those sort of things, not something deemed like productive. And so they did a study, and they found that if they reduced that down to, I think it was less than 2 hours a day, that behavior improved and attention span. And it was like, it's the things you don't think, it's not what we're talking about, but it is, in the sense that if you were intentional at work, like, Erin will call me all the time. She says, hey, did you check in with your mom? And I'd be like, no, I was working. Like, cause I'm not going to it's not that I don't think about other people, but like, I'm focused on what I'm doing right now. And when I get out of that, and I build a certain schedule, to Ford's point, of intentionality of when I call certain people outside of work, because I do think about it like, okay, I should, my mom's older, I should check in with my mom. So I'll give her a call, but I'm not going to do it from work. Cause like, that's all that's going to happen is if I take 35, 40 minutes to do something in the middle of the day, not work related, I'm going to be at work an extra hour.
Right.
And I'm not against being at work at the extra hour, but if I was just more intentional, you know what I mean? That 35 minutes cost me an hour. Whereas if I had just not done it, it would only cost me 35 minutes, like and I think that's sort of what you're getting at, Ford, that when you stay on task and you're focused, you can be really productive. And our teams are generally, but we talk about it, but I felt like it's a hard thing to explain because, when we went back to, when we did some of the branding stuff, and that was one of the things that held us up on the, get it done
right till the
job is done.
Yeah.
Is we felt like I always had to explain it like, well, yeah, no, I'm not saying you have to work 80 hours a week,
right,
but I think it is really true. It's important to who we are as a company and as a culture to be able to say, we're going to work hard and we're going to work hours. I always say it, I don't hide it, we're going to work 50 hours a week. That's happening,
right?
That's how we run. I want to run 5 10s, perfect. I don't want to run the 6th day if I don't have to. And I'd rather weather not get in my way and everybody has Saturday off. But we're also, like Ford's always said, we're also not working Sunday. Like, we're not playing around with that. And we like people to be able to take their time, take your vacation. Take your time with your family, whether it be at the end of the day, the end of the week, or the end of the, month, or some holiday.
Yeah. I think I like what you said there, Ford. I think it is like sort of commitment to each thing, right? If you're at work, committing to be at work doesn't mean you have to commit to be there all the time. And if you're with your family or you're pursuing other things, maybe you don't have a family, committing to your time to those things. And when you're doing them, like when you're in the moment, live in the moment. And that's actually really interesting. Dan, you said the screen time. Do either of you on my phone, it like has the,
tells you how much.
Yeah. The amount of like time you've spent on your device.
Mm.
And mine, I think mine's relatively low. It still is interesting at times to see like where that time is spent. A lot of it is in like what it considers to be productivity, whether that is like
reading your emails considered productive.
Yeah. Emails is considered productive time according to my cell phone.
Yeah.
I agree or disagree, but I think that that is an interesting perspective because, like my daughter, who right now is 15-year-old, doesn't work a lot, would like to pick up some hours, stuff like that. But her screen time is certainly higher during the non-school year than everyone else in our family because we've got stuff going on. We're all working or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
Well, I think part of it is too, and it's like, it sounds really, training the people around you to understand things, right? Like, what has emails, text, phone calls happen? People expect to be able to get a hold of you at any time. And, I'm old enough that people didn't even have phones at all. And then when people started having phones, they were in their lunchbox. They check them on their lunch break and then check them when they left at the end of the day. Because while they were there, unless there was an emergency, which, the job sites, some people won't understand this. There used to be a landline run out to the job site when this new job started. And it was in the foreman's trailer or whatever it was. It was before car phones.
Mm-hmm.
I was when I was like 8, we were working on the job sites for people clearing. And like, if you need to make a phone call for something, you went up to the foreman's, or the foreman got a call if like there was some type of issue, and then he would tell the employee. But like the focus was on the work at that time.
Right.
And it's amazing how many people, it's taken years, but like they know not to call me between 7 and 5 because like I'm not going to answer.
Right. Yeah.
I might check the now with the transcripts of the voicemails. I'll check and make sure it's not something that's
an emergency. Yeah.
Emergency.
Right.
But it's just more of that understanding. Like, hey, I have a normal. I don't call people that I know during that time if I know that they're doing something specific. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
The other thing I enjoy is like car time. Great time to make phone calls for me. It's like, okay, if I'm on the road the other day, I was on the road for like 2.5 hours. I was like, most of it was on the phone because it was like, okay, I'm in a confined space. I can't do anything else except for listen to podcasts or music. So I'm going to make these phone calls that I wanted to catch up on.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's part of it. But,
does that mess with you ever? Like, I do the same thing. I love to make my phone calls while I'm driving.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, though, it catches me because like I'm like don't necessarily have access to some of the things that I am talking about or like looked at before I made the phone call.
Yeah.
It happened to me today. Like, I was chatting on the phone with somebody while I was driving about like something I disagreed about, right? But didn't have in front of me to use the exact information. So I was like trying to like disagree.
Just having a
I was trying to disagree from memory,
Yeah.
and that doesn't always go.
I do
well.
that.
Usually for me, it's like the fun calls. It's just like friends that I haven't caught
yeah.
up with in a while, that kind of stuff. I mean, like,
Mhm.
if that's the other thing is like if it's a work call that I know I need to have my information in front of me,
That's true.
it's
yeah.
going to voicemail because I'm not going to be caught flat-footed when I'm
Right.
having that conversation.
Yeah, see, I tend to, I do the same thing with the phone in the car. But what I just do is I just say, like, I don't have anything in front of me. I'm driving,
Yeah.
but you have the time. Like, you have my attention now. We can have this conversation. I don't have the data in front of me.
Right.
So we're going to have a conversation in principle about what you'd like to talk about. And then we'll both understand where we are and we can sort of move from there. For when you said about, you remember when it was the phone in the trailer, one of the really telling things for me, and I think this is relevant, we can sort of relate to it of the intentionality pieces. So a couple of my uncles were doctors. One of them was an emergency room doctor. And I remember when he got a pager, like, and you're talking, that would have been like early 80s. He was also the first one I ever knew that had an actual, like, box phone and a car phone. He was always the first, just because he had to be reachable. He was an emergency room doctor, always on call. But the reason I tell you that is not to tell you how all these things. It's to say he was an emergency room doctor before he was always on call. Like, there was a point at which he would just go home and it wasn't his problem anymore. Like, it didn't even matter if he was the most qualified person to deal with some emergency that they would have paged him about. He wasn't working.
Right.
Right. And so that's part of the problem as a society. We've undone that expectation, and Rob Grafe is another one, actually. Rob Grafe still has a flip phone with no voicemail and no texting. You can't reach him. And he answers if he feels like it. Because when Rob's not working, he is not working.
Sure.
He's not working.
Yeah.
And so there's a certain level of intentionality about that, that Ford brought up. That's a really strong way to say it, is that be intentional about being present, and I think you and I talk about it with not using our phones.
Right.
That people say, oh, did you get a picture of like this? And you're like, no.
Yeah.
I on purpose didn't take a picture.
Yeah. That was a while ago, but I was saying I need that person, whatever that's called. Like, like the historian or something, right? Like
the videographer that follows you around because you don't do it yourself.
I need someone to document this. I'm going to experience it,
Yes.
and I'm going to remember it. I'll never be able to show it to you,
Yeah.
tell you about, like, whatever. So,
Well, of the crazy things that I would have never thought I have, for the girls, we have one of those, the trace cameras. And that's exactly why, because Erin started to tape all the games with her phone and she would just miss all the games. She was there and she would be happy, but she was like trying to be quiet because she's video. And I don't know what she's going to do with it. We have it now. We don't really even use it for anything. Sure. The girls watch it a little bit, but it's exactly because of that, because I do not want to be my own videographer. I want to just enjoy what's happening, enjoy life, and then be able to, I can remember it and we can talk about it. And if I don't have enough pictures, I think that's better than not having enjoyed it in the first place.
I'm like, true to form here. Like I'm a little bit of a nerd about like stuff like that. So I don't videotape, but occasionally, like if I'm watching the kids play sports, I'll take notes. Oh, so
break out your Remarkable and start taking notes.
A little. I do it on my phone. Usually, I don't carry my notepad with me.
How do the kids feel about that?
They get an email at the end of the game
email at the end of the practice.
It's not that. It's not like a review. It's just so they all take it differently, of course, right? And that's a personality thing. But like I was with Adeline this weekend, and I don't get to spend a lot of time watching Adeline play sports because I'm usually coaching the boys or somebody else, right? So I did this for her this weekend at our tournament, and she was like, I really liked that, and I was like, oh, good, because I wasn't trying to like offend you, and I might have like framed some things the way that I made sure that she wasn't going to take it the wrong way. Right. But she was like, I really liked that because like it wasn't just like trying to remember the thing. You like wrote down what had happened and why it was good, or why it shouldn't have been different. And
I like notes. Notes was a good idea.
I think notes is because then I was there, I experienced it all, and I could like reflect on it. I don't know. So that's just me being weird though. I'm a weirdo.
Yeah.
Well, I think that the when you were talking about it earlier too, the interesting thing is that like the world has changed. We accept it. We have to adjust to it. But to certain people, work has a certain connotation.
Yeah.
And so they think it's seeped into the rest of their life, right? But what they're not paying attention to is their life has seeped into their work more too. Like what we're talking about now, there's not like hard lines in the sand, but there's actually there's that mixing. It's going both directions, but you don't account for the time when your life mixed into your work. You only account for the time where your work mixed into your outside life.
Recently, Ford and I were together outside of work, and I don't remember what we were talking about at the time, but Erin said, and Tamara will say the same thing. I thought we talked about it. No work talk when we're trying to be
right.
With when we're fortunate enough that if Ford and I happen to be out together with our wives.
She scolded us at least 3 times, didn't she?
Yeah.
And we were really not, I mean, we were on the edges. We were not like on a real thing.
That was the point I was going to, we weren't talking about work. It was a work related thing, like, because there's a social.
It's like talking about common interests.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was like, I mean, this work is a social environment.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And that is probably more true in the field even than it is in the office. You know what I mean? These guys spend a lot of hours in hard conditions working together. So,
might like go to dinner afterwards.
Right. They go to each other's weddings. They do all these things. So to say, that's why I don't like the work-life balance thing, because I guess you'd have to be really wealthy and not be able to deal with being bored or something to be able to not have any work, and just, so it's not a work-life balance. I want to be clear. What it is I think Ford nailed it early in this conversation. It's about being intentional, that when you're at work, you get your work done and you be productive and be the best version of yourself you can. And when you step away from work, give the other piece of your life the same respect and the same focus and intentionality, and do that thing to the best of your ability. And if you can do that, the two can intertwine and mix as much as they want for the most part, and you'll feel healthy and feel good about it.
Yeah. One thing I was thinking of as you were talking there is how like personal that like relationship or balance or whatever you want to call it is, because it is so different for everybody. And I'm sure like my own interpretation of what that should look like or can look like is probably much different, and maybe even than from the two of you and I'm sure certainly different than some of the other folks on our team. And that might be at times the hardest part to keep in perspective, is to say, like, you know, like my schedule's a little more flexible than a lot of our folks, right? So like many of them are, you know, boots on the ground and working before 7 a.m. And I might be answering emails or responding to things, but I, you know, from like, you know, 6 a.m. to 7 a.m., I'm usually trying to get a workout in. And then here at the office by about 7:30. So I have a little bit of flexibility, but then, you know, later into the evening, I might continue to make myself accessible to work or doing work related things where we're trying to ask them, like, it's okay to draw that line. Like, you didn't have to be accessible anymore. Go be home, go be with your family. You know, your stuff will show up and still be there the next day. And I think that for me, sometimes that's the hardest thing, is like, you know, one of you guys were talking about like the idea of like always available. And I think some of it is like, are you available when I'm available? And,
well, I was just going to say that, Private. The other like fine line there is respecting that the other person's availability is different, right? Their expectation of how they, you know what I mean? Like, our guys will reach out to me at 6 a.m. You know what I mean? Sure. And it's not a problem. That's fine. Yeah. I will answer the phone if I need to, but they've started to text me because they know, like, I don't actually have to be standing in the office at 6. I could, right. I might be. It's unlikely, but I might be. But by 7, I am a lot of times. But ironically, they'll be off and they'll call me at 5:30 or 6 and say, hey, we just wanted to go over this. And they're not working, but they know that I'm likely still working and available. And so, you know, and I try and give them that same respect, that I try not to call them late. So it would be a funny thing. We may talk, but if you tracked my phone records, most of the time I talk to the guys in the field, our foreman or anyone else late. They called me. Mm-hmm. If I call them, like I'll call, you know, Dylan or Brad later, but there's that same expectation that, hey, you have a little bit more flexibility like you talked about. But even then I always say, hey, if you can't talk, I usually text first and say, hey, do you have a few minutes to talk? Because I acknowledge this is outside of the normal time I would expect you to. Yeah. You know? And so that's where I'm like outside of that realm where I'm saying I want to respect your space. But if we need to get stuff done, I'll reach out. But if you say, hey, I can't talk till the morning, that's fine. We'll talk in the morning.
I try and always like, every time I call somebody, and it catches people off guard sometimes, but when I call people, I usually try and say, did I catch you at a bad time? And
you do say that a lot when you call off hours, when you call me.
Yeah. Especially in times that I would anticipate that maybe you're not also still working or whatever the case may be. So I try and say that. I try and be like, did I catch you at a bad time? Mm. And I think people, and like maybe people just aren't honest, but usually like, no, I'm available, you know, like I already picked up. Right. So, but I'm trying to be genuine there. I'm trying to be like, look, this isn't like urgent, but I thought it'd be easier to talk through than to exchange a bunch of emails. So like if this is a bad time, like let's set up a time to talk about it. But I'm working through it. So
you know what happens a lot with Ford and I and with you and I, and maybe I'm the centerpiece of that because I engage a lot, but is I'll call you after hours, but not about work. You know, like something funny that happened that I just don't feel like I think it's funny and I want to tell you, but I don't want to wait till tomorrow to tell you at work, like at the water cooler. Yeah. Like I want to tell you now, you know? And so then one of the things I'll do is say, hey, I wanted to talk to you about something this is not work related. Right. You know what I mean? Cause I know it's off, like it's 9:30 at night. This is not a work related thing.
Our schedules like at the evening are like just off enough too. Yeah. That I feel like I always like am putting your call through to voicemail because like I'm at practice still or whatever.
And I just got
done back. Or yeah.
Well, it's funny because you say that, like I always think about when you do that. Cause I'm like, to me, I'm like, if I answered it, I'm available. Yeah. If I didn't answer it,
I appreciate that.
Right. Like that's just my mentality. Cause like something that always cracks me up when people like you call them, they're like, they answer, they must be doing something. And they're like, hey, can I call you right back? It's like, well, then just don't answer the phone. Like, I don't know why you broke your stride to do that. But I think one thing that's kind of changing is there used to be, we'll call them norms in general, not just anything. And now I think as companies, we have to define the norms because to each person, there is such a, I don't know, it's just this individualism that we're like, well, my belief in this is something different. And so like, we have to really state what and then people can either come along or they know what to expect because, you know, we say stuff for like about the family And to someone else, like, well, that's not family related. And it's like, it is to us.
Sure.
Right. I mean, like, you might not see it that way, but, you know, just because like some people are like, well, it doesn't follow with what you're saying. It's like, to us, it does. So that's how we're going to do this. It doesn't to you. You can either accept to, you know, join in and make that adjustment or not be part of the team, but you can't be both at the same time because there is so much ambiguity out there and it's not that defined like it used to be, you know, went to work from this time to this time, they got home, dinner, you know, like all that stuff is out the window, which is perfectly fine. But it's like, as our own culture at our company, we have to say what it is. And then people can either choose to be part or not be part of it. But they're just that like, well, that's not what I thought it was. It's like, well, unfortunately, you know, this is the way that the ship is going.
And we got to be true to it. You know what I mean? Like that's the thing. And that's what I'm glad this worked. I feel like it worked out this conversation because it's doing what I intended when I brought it up, for me at least, which is to say like, this is the way we want to run. This is how it is. And you just need to realize the parameters. And if it fits for you, then great. And if it does, it's really, I mean, it's been great for me. You know what I mean? It's one of those things, the flexibility and the freedom and the balance has been really great for me. And I mean, you know, there'll be times when you've done it a little bit. I've done it a little bit. Ford's done it a little bit where you genuinely get away, turn it off where I don't have phone signal. But it's so rare, but I don't need to because I feel like I can manage it. But if you need to, you need to, you know, and that's, you just got to find your space and let everybody know where you stand and then be intentional about when you're with it. And it's a good fit.
Yeah.
Except for some important people on our team who they're out of office doesn't block their phone. But other than that,
he may or may not hear this podcast. DK.
Clemis. I tried so hard to get the phone to not ring. I was like, I
was off the other week and like, I don't put out of office on anything just because like, they're, you know, people don't understand, but it's 24/7, 365. That's the life I've chosen. It's not anybody's problem but my own, but I'm accepting of it. So it's not like I'm crying about it, but it's like, you just laugh because you're like, there is no out of office. Like, we're all going to check our phones. We're all going to do whatever we need to do because that's our responsibilities. And it's just funny because it's like, I was like, I don't even know how to do that. And then like, he tried to do it. It didn't work for him. I thought that was kind of funny.
I don't understand the logic behind why the thing it says didn't work. But
you know what's funny for it? And I think it speaks to that it's the person, you know, which we sort of talked about, is one of my fondest memories going back to when I ran the electrical construction business. Was I can remember surfing with a waterproof phone, and I would answer the phone because I didn't look at it like it was interrupting. There's no way I should have been surfing at that point in the middle of a workday, but I was because I could do both. I could work. Now, I wouldn't just answer a phone I didn't know, but if like I had client's number saved or I had somebody, I would answer the phone, like paddle out a little bit, answer the phone, have a conversation, put the phone back in the pocket that wouldn't get away from me. And then surf. Now, it didn't happen a lot. It probably only happened 10 times in my life. But I think about that as like, that's genuine. Like to me, that is work-life balance. Like I just got to play and I got to work. You know what I mean? And we're not there anymore. I wouldn't even do it anymore just because of where we are. But it's interesting. It speaks to like me as a person is how what I view to when Ford said like it's so become so individual. Like that's the opposite of work-life balance. I've like mashed the two together, but that's what I like is I like when there's less of a line, but you can be intentional about both and you can get to do both.
Yeah. I think that's the key. Like be committed to what it is that you said you're going to be doing and be there. Right?
I mean, my dad, and maybe I'll end with this. My dad was blue collar. You know, I mean, he was union, but he was blue collar. And he was not at a lot of things that I did. Because he had to work. And so I think that's where it comes from me wanting to blur that lines is he was not, it was very hard for him to do that. You know what I mean? He was boots on the ground. He had to be somewhere. He couldn't simultaneously do those two things. So I see it as a little bit free that we have the ability to do it and to try and, that's where I try and, I think at the core of where it comes from with me is making sure that Justin Boyer can get to his son's baseball game. You know what I mean? That these guys can go out and see their kids do things or do what they want to do because we allow them, we respect their space enough and don't put them in a position financially where they need to work every available hour, but rather hope that we can help them and we can work together as a team and create the space where the guys will want to work and realize that if, you know, the other day Justin worked on the 5th of July when he had intended to take off so that someone else who had kids that were, they had plans, didn't have to work. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
Like that's a macro of what we want to do. You know what I mean? Is that we said like, okay, who's the best suited to be able to do this right now and available? You find that person and they do it. And then that created space for somebody else.
Yeah.
So I'm glad we got to have the conversation.
Yeah, for sure. It's a good one. And I'm sure it'll continue to evolve, right? If we had this conversation 12 months from now, we might each have different answers. So, yeah, good conversation for sure. That's probably a good place to wrap it up. Thanks for joining us today, folks. We hope that you got something from this, and we hope you come back for another episode.